Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to head over to Ireland once again and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So these guys have been around for a little while, they seem to do a good variety of different styles and their beers are supposed to be pretty highly rated actually. So I'll have to say I'm very curious to see how this one turns out, and it's always nice to introduce new Irish breweries to you here on the channel. So hopefully this is another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Northern Ireland. We're going to go right to the north coast of Northern Ireland to Portrush, which is right next to Coleraine, and we're having a look at my first beer from Lacada Brewery Cooperative. So this particular beer is called West Bay. It comes in at 4.6% ABV, and this one I believe is a West Coast style pale ale. So yeah, very, very curious to see how this one turns out. It certainly looks very nice. It's quite a highly rated beer, so let's see how we get on with this one then. Big shout out and thank you in this review to Paul Rogers of Dalriada Imports. He very kindly gave me this beer along with the other Irish ones as well that you've been seeing me review on the channel over the last little while, and I believe this is a brewery that he's hoping to add to his inventory over the next little while. So you may well be seeing the Lakada beers making their way to Scotland at some point in the future. Fingers crossed. But let's crack on with this review then and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Lacada Brewery Cooperative. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers as I mentioned, but I'm sure hopefully we can review some more in the future. There's all the usual social media down there as well. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Irish beers that I've reviewed for you, both from the Republic and from the North, and we will be adding to that over the next little while because of all the beer that Paul gave me. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes then to tell you a little bit about Lacada Brewery then. So, Lacada Brewery, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Portrush near Coleraine in County Antrim in the very northern part of Northern Ireland, and this brewery was founded back in 2015 by Laurie Davies. But Laurie had been a home brewer in his shed from the age of 16 years old, but then he went on to study history and then he ran a shop, and he worked in various rural communities for quite a wee while from what I understand. 20 years later though, he returned to home brewing and he developed a few recipes that went down really quite well, and at this point he started to investigate brewing commercially. So in the early days he attended a number of conventions and he visited a number of other breweries in different places. I believe he went to Scotland and visited different ones around the whole island of Ireland, but he later managed to put together a steering group and they started to seek investment in his idea locally. So as a result, today the brewery is run as a cooperative and they've got somewhere in the region of 300 investors, a number of whom take an active role in the day-to-day operations of the company. But a little bit later on from that, they started up in 2015 as we said, but in 2019 they announced a new investment programme which will eventually see them move from their current bespoke brewery that they have into a larger facility which will also have a restaurant and tap room. But anyone can buy shares in the brewery and the minimum investment is £100, and I think you can invest anywhere up to £20,000. So it is pretty cool actually, and as I said, many people who have done this have become friends of Laurie's and have, you know, been taking active day-to-day roles in the company, which is cool. But the name of course is a little bit unusual. For those of you who are not really familiar with Gaelic or you know, Irish and Scottish Gaelic, whatever, but the brewery name Lakada is actually derived from Leachfada, which in English means the long stone, and it refers to a rocky outcrop near the Giant's Causeway, which isn't too far actually from Portrush and Coleraine, so that's definitely worth checking out if you do make it over to Ireland. But the salamander that they use as the brewery symbol has an interesting story behind it. It actually comes from a gold salamander that was salvaged from a shipwreck near Portrush back in the 1960s. So the ship was called the Aroma, and it was actually part of the Spanish Armada, but it got caught in a storm and it was forced onto the north coast of Ireland back in the 1580s, if I remember the year correctly. But these guys, as we say, have continued to expand over the years with new fermenters and, you know, just developing new recipes and stuff like this. And as of November 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 80 different kinds of beer. Most of it has been for Northern Ireland so far, but they are starting to get their beers out there a little bit more from what I understand. So yeah, definitely a pretty interesting brewery, this one. This is the first cooperative brewery, I believe, that I've come across in the Irish beers that I've reviewed so far. I have come across a few of them in Scandinavia. Slowburn, I think, in Copenhagen has been the most recent one that we've come across that uses this type of ownership and things. But yeah, definitely very, very cool and a very interesting way to do things. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Lacada Brewing Company for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get on and have a look at this beer itself then. So just to let you have a little look at the can art on this one before we open it up. As you can see, a lot of their beers, I should say, when you look on the website, a lot of them actually have this kind of coastal sort of imagery to them. But yeah, when we zoom in, there you can see the Lakada, the golden salamander. Of course, apparently the original one that they found, it was originally encrusted with rubies, but I think those were lost to the sea before this thing was salvaged in the 1960s. But yeah, there you can see West Bay Citra Paleo, 4.6% ABV, and it tells you a little bit about this beer on the back. So this one is a simple American-style paleo, dry hop with Citra, giving a fresh, zesty and easy drinking beer, and it doesn't have oats or wheat listed in it. So that's how we can say that it is most likely to be a West Coast sort of paleo, this one. It's got a gold top on the can, of course, but other than that, I can't really tell you all that much about this beer actually. But yeah, 4.6% West Coast style paleo. This one, the West Bay Citra Paleo from Lacada Brewery Cooperative in Portrush, County Antrim in Northern Ireland. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Really curious to see, as I said earlier, what this one will have in store for us. I can't remember how many breweries I've reviewed from Northern Ireland now. Of course, we tried my first beers from Beer Hut in the last Irish review that we did. I'm trying to think what else we've had from Northern Ireland. Over the years we've had Boundary, of course, Brewbound and things like that as well. We've had a good few actually, some very, very good beers both from the north and from the Republic in Ireland these days. So if you get the chance to try some Irish beer, I highly recommend that you do. But yeah, there we go. We've got the beer, or most of it, out and into the glass. So let's take a look at the appearance of this one then. So before the head disappears, you can see that this one has poured with about a 3/4 finger head. I would describe this one as being a kind of slightly creamy colour. You can see the bubbles are very nice and quite small on this. The camera on this, still blown away by the camera on this phone. It's absolutely beautiful. Just look at that. But lovely looking beer, this one, I have to say. That head is starting to fade away, it'll eventually leave just a nice kind of thin foamy layer. If we shine the light through this beer, I would describe this one as quite a rich, deep yellow colour. Now remember, the colour of your beer depends on, one, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to giving you the EBC rating. The length of your wort boil is also going to play a role. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. A paleo like this one is probably going to undergo a wort boil of between 70 to 90 minutes. Any adjuncts that you use or any barrel aging that you do, which is quite unlikely with this style, I should add, will also affect the colour too. So mainly it's the type of malts and the wort boil that are affecting the colour of this one. But yeah, very rich, deep yellow colour. As you can see, if I put my hand behind the glass there, it's got a nice little bit of natural haze to it, which is kind of typical for more West Coasty type beers. But one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there. But overall, it does look pretty nice, I have to say. So yeah, kind of what you'd expect of a West Coast paleo. Nothing more we can really say about the appearance of this one. So let's go on to the aroma and see what we get. Really curious about this, as I said. Ooh, that does smell pretty nice actually. It's a little bit old school, this one. It's a little bit of a nostalgic beer, this one. So as we know, this is a Citra Pale Ale, so just to point out to you, Citra is an American hop, 14% alpha acid, usually gives you big juicy mangoes. It's also got quite a kind of lemon limey edge to it. It can also give you some lychee and gooseberry type notes as well, but the way this hop behaves really kind of depends on what yeast and malt base you put it in. It will be a bit different and a bit softer and juicier than a New England IPA, whereas it will be a bit more kind of oily and zesty in a West Coast pale ale, where you've got the more kind of slightly biscuity caramelly malt base. So that's what I'm expecting out of this one. But aroma wise, from the off, this beer, the malt base in this is West Coast. This is absolutely a West Coast pale ale. You've got that nice kind of sweetness to it, good kind of bigger green component as well, and you've also got that nice kind of juicy oily fruit. So classic West Coast smelling pale ale, this one. But let's break that aroma down for you a little bit further and just describe it a wee bit more kind of in depth. So when you sugar this beer up, you're absolutely going to get a nice little bit of a kind of bread crusty backbone to it. Absolutely lovely kind of fresh white bready characters in there, but definitely a little bit of a crusty backbone. Smooth white bread, as I said. But yeah, I like how this one, I do like how this one goes together. The malt base is pretty straightforward and it does the job. But yeah, bread crust, smooth white bread. On top of that, there is a little bit of a kind of McVitie's digestive and caramelly, brown sugary sort of thing. Yeah, I would say that it's actually, the more that I smell of this, it's actually quite grainy, and I do, the grainy notes in this one actually don't seem all that familiar. Because sometimes you can pick up whether it's going to be there's a bit of golden promise or there's a bit of Maris Otter or something like that. I don't actually recognise all that much in the way of the grain profile of this one just from the nose. So I do wonder if this is maybe using some kind of local Irish grain. So that would be quite interesting. I assume because of all the whiskey and things that's produced over there as well, that there will be quite a few Irish malteries. But yeah, the malt profile on this one, it actually, the more that I smell of it, it becomes a little bit more sort of brown bready, like a kind of wholemeal bready character that you get out of this one. But I definitely like how that goes together for sure. So on the sweeter side of things, there's definitely a wee bit of a sweet caramel in this one, which I do like. You've got a nice little bit of a McVitie's digestive kind of quality in there as well. So yeah, a little bit of sweet caramel, a bit of McVitie's digestive, then on top of that, lovely kind of brown bready notes, and underneath just a little bit of a more kind of grainy bread crust, potentially one or two little slightly woody notes underneath. But other than that, I think we've described the malt base as much as we need to. I'm curious to see how that's going to translate into the actual flavour of the beer as well. But let's have a look at the hoppy side of things and just see how we go. So on the green component, you can get, there's quite a few little things going on there. But straight away with this one, you can smell a little bit of earthiness, which is quite surprising actually for Citra. Citra normally doesn't really show too much earthiness. So for me, there is a little bit of earthiness in there. There's quite a nice big deep floral aromatic character coming out of this one, which is something that you do expect. You also have to remember with a more West Coast type pale ale that West Coast IPAs and pale ales and things will use early edition hops. Now New England ones only really use the late edition and dry hops, but they don't give you much in the way of bitterness, and the late edition hops don't give you much in the way of bitterness, whereas the dry hopping gives you no bitterness, and usually the green notes that you get out of these can be a little bit more suppressed, if you like. But the early edition hops that are used as well in West Coast IPAs, those are the ones that will give you more bitterness, and they can give you the big, deep, dank flavours and aromas, of course. But you can definitely get a little bit of the depth to the green character in this one, and that tells you that there has been some early edition hop in this. Certainly not as big and bold as they used to be, but that's probably due to, you know, palates and noses changing a little bit as things have gone, and of course the recipe will probably be a little bit different compared to what a West Coast pale ale would have been back in, you know, 2012 or something like this. And that's just because people aren't used to such bitter beers anymore. But anyway, that's by the by. But yeah, certainly a nice big deep floral aromatic character out of this one. I would say that it's actually got a little bit of spice to it, which is interesting. So to me that signifies a little bit of early edition hop for sure. But then you've also got a nice kind of wet, grassy sort of thing coming out of this. So yeah, nice wet, grassy character, a little bit of citrusy zest. And yeah, I do like how that goes together in this one. So yeah, Nice big green component to this one, and you would kind of expect that from Citra, of course. But let's focus on the fruity side of the beer. So on that fruity side of things, for me, there's definitely a nice little bit of a kind of oily character for sure. You get a nice big kind of oily mango out of it. There is a wee bit of a kind of stronger passion fruit sitting behind there as well. So yeah, a nice little bit of stronger passion fruit, a nice little bit of an oily mango, and you are getting one or two little apricot-y and pineapple-y kind of characters out of this one. But going further forward, there's a little bit of a kind of limey character to this one for me. You do get some of that kind of big lemony zest, but all of these things are to be expected of Citra as a hop. So yeah, a little bit of passion fruit, nice big kind of oily mango-y character to it, wee bit pineapple and apricot and stuff in there too, but yeah, quite big lemon limey notes, and that kind of fits in with the grassy side of the beer and the slightly bigger green component that it has. So yeah, let's put the last little bit of this into the can. We'll have a taste and see how we go on, but as I always say, take a little bit of time just to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it, but we're going to try this one now. So yeah, this one is the West Bay, a Citra Pale Ale coming in at 4.6% ABV from Lacada Brewery Cooperative in Portrush near Coleraine in County Antrim in the north of Northern Ireland. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and thank you once again to Paul for making this review possible. Let's have a look at this. Yeah. Now, I'm going to say straight away, it's just a really nice, simple, easy drinking beer, this one. As I've told you in other pale ale reviews that I've done recently, this is a style that I haven't really, or a style bracket I should say, that I haven't touched upon too much on the channel, but I've been getting into it a little bit more recently. And the main thing behind that was that, I guess, I went through that, I still am, I love lagers, been going through a little bit of a lager phase over the last kind of 2 years or so. So really enjoying my lager beers, and as a result of that, I started to have a little look at some of the kind of lower ABV IPAs that were on the go. There was quite a few breweries back over in Sweden that were producing these, and there was some really nice ones from the likes of Brewski and so on. So as a result of that, when I've been back in Scotland, and I think in Scotland and Ireland and England, I guess as well, there are more pale ales produced. You don't find too many beers that are specifically termed pale ale over in Sweden and Denmark. They tend to go for the full IPA rather than a pale ale. But yeah, this is quite I've found some really good examples of lower ABV New England IPAs and pale ales and stuff like the session IPAs and so on. So as far as I'm aware, the main difference between a sort of session IPA and a pale ale would be the kind of hop to malt ratio. So the pale ale and the IPA are related through their hop to malt ratio. What they do with a session IPA, from what I understand, is keep the IPA hop to malt ratio, but they take the malt content down, so you've got a lower alcohol. Whereas if you go to a pale ale, the hop to malt ratio is different, but of course you have a similar ABV. So that's the kind of technical difference between a pale ale and a session IPA, I guess. So just keep that in mind. But this one for me is another very solidly done pale ale, and I'm not surprised if Paul's looking at bringing these beers over to Scotland, he doesn't bring bad beers. So yeah, this is solid. So well done to Lakada. But let's break the flavour of this beer down and describe it for you a wee bit more in depth. So yeah, this one is, as I say, it's just a really nice all-round easy drinking beer. But straight away across that middle third of your palate, back third of your palate as well, you can feel a little bit of that kind of bread crusty quality there. So that just blankets the middle of your tongue. On top of that, you do get a wee bit of white bread, but I find that the bready character in this beer is a little bit more sort of like a wholemealy brown bread, and you can feel that it does get a wee touch grainier the further into the aftertaste that you go. Now, this could be, the sort of bready character you get in this beer will likely be down to two things. Probably they've got a house yeast strain that's been developed over time, and I would guess that they probably are using some sort of local grain, because the way that the malt in this one doesn't feel all that familiar to me. The sort of character that you get, this, as I said earlier, you can usually tell Golden Promise and Maris Otter and Crystal and Turo. You can usually tell the malts after a while. You can get an idea of which ones are there. But this is one that I don't really recognise that much, but it's like a kind of wet sort of brown bready character you get off of this, but it's nice. Would be curious to know what the malt profile of this beer is. It wasn't listed on the website as far as I could see, or on the Untappd. But yeah, the brown bready backbone that this one has is pretty nice actually. So if you come towards, if we focus on the middle third of your palate now, so if you come towards the front of that middle third of your tongue, you will get a little touch of woody character underneath, for sure. So there is a little touch of woody character behind the edge of that kind of middle third of your palate. But then, as I say, you've got bread crust and brown bread on top of that. In the middle of that middle third of your palate, you've got a nice kind of big circle there, so you can feel there is a wee bit of a kind of brown sugary element to this one. So on top of that, you can feel that little bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuity layer, and it does get a little bit grainier the further out towards the extremities of that middle third of the palate that you go. But in the very dead centre of your palate, there is a slightly more concentrated circle with a sweet caramelly note in there, and that kind of lingers. That does linger into the aftertaste. So yeah, I like how I do like how that goes together in this one. It's definitely got that kind of more brown sugary note that you would expect of a West Coast pale ale. This one, so it gets a thumbs up from me in that regard actually. So yeah, I think malt base wise, this one is nicely done. Nothing really surprising about it when you consider the style bracket, but like I say, the bready notes for me are a bit different, so I suspect there's Irish grain in this one, which is quite nice actually. I do like it when breweries do that, they use some local grains. But I don't think there's anything else to say about the middle third of the palate. Let's move on to the back third of the palate. So between that middle and back third of your palate, you can feel there's a wee bit of a bready build-up. You do get a bit more of a kind of bread crusty, grainy sort of thing coming out of the beer. And again, I like how that goes together. So, on the back third of your palate, then you've got much the same. You can feel the graininess becomes a little bit more intense from the bread crust. You can feel the nice smooth white. It's actually got a little bit more of a white bready character on the back third of your palate, which is interesting. You've also got the brown bread on top of that, and it's almost a bit thicker and fluffier and slightly smoother in some ways as well, which is quite interesting. But on top of all of that, you start to get a little bit more of the kind of yeasty character, and to a degree, this beer does have a little bit of a kind of slightly crackery, woody, farmhousey sort of thing going on the yeasty character that just sits on top of the bready notes on the back third of the palate. So again, that's pretty interesting for me. I do like how that goes together for sure. But yeah, this, as I said, is just a really nice kind of easy drinking, really nice easy drinking beer for sure. Yeah, this one really does. It just really does tick the boxes. But yeah, so on that back third of your palate, yeah, a bit more intense bread crust, lovely smooth brown bread, or lovely smooth white bread actually on the back third, then a bit of brown bread, then on top of that you've got a slightly more doughy, yeasty kind of element to it, a little bit, has got a little bit more of a grainy character to it, a little bit kind of slightly farmhousey, kind of grainy, slightly woody and crackery vibe as well to it, which is kind of interesting. But when you start on that back third of your palate, you can feel the flavour is a little bit taller, but then as you move into the middle third of your palate, it just condenses down a wee bit, then you've got those slightly sweeter brown sugary notes that we were talking about earlier. So I do like how that goes together in this one. So that gets a thumbs up from me in that regard. But yeah, I think we can move on to talk about the hoppy side of the beer then. So back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness in there. As you move further forward, it is a little touch more herbal. Then as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, you've got a little bit more of a kind of floral, aromatic sort of thing coming out of the beer as well. So you can feel that pushing forward. I would say the floral aromaticity, it's actually a little bit wetter. It's not too spicy and too bitter, so it's not such a big bitterness beer, this one. But yeah, as I say, the pale ales, West Coast pale ales and IBUs are not as they once were back in like 2012, 2014, or even 2015 when these guys were founded actually. So yeah, that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, round the front curve of the palate, you've got a little bit of a lighter grassy quality to this one. It does have a degree of zestiness to it, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, the way that this beer goes about its business, I have to say, is pretty nice actually. So yeah, green component I think is fairly solid, and again nothing too surprising. But this beer is one of these ones that's nothing surprising but just well done, and you can't ask for much more these days, to be honest with you. So let's look at the front third of your palate then. Fruity side of the beer. So border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get a nice little bit of bready build up in there, a wee bit of bread crust. Then the base of that front third of your palate is a little bit more of a kind of smooth, kind of slightly brown bready leaning sort of thing, I guess we could say. But on top of that, you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy flavours, those juicy fruity flavours just roll their way out of the beer. And again, if you know Citra, this one is what you'd expect. So let's break that down for you as well. So, at the back of the front third of your palate, you do get just a teeny little bit of that passion fruity, but that's very, very minimal. But very quickly after that, it does become more kind of juicy and mangoey. As you reach the middle of that front third of your palate, you get a little bit of the dried apricot notes and maybe a wee bit of the pineapple kind of lingering into the aftertaste. But as you go over into the front half of that front third of your tongue, you get the more kind of lemon limey notes out of this one. And for me, this beer actually leans a little bit more towards the lemon limey side of things, and I do get a wee bit of gooseberry out of this as well actually, which you can get sometimes from Citra. So I'm getting a little bit of that, but it's certainly, I would say, for a Citra Pale Ale, this isn't the biggest and zestiest one that I've come across that I can think of. But it still shows you a lot of the nice. It shows you actually the more dry and oily side of the Citra hop actually. And in fairness, I think when I've had Citra Pale Ales, the more zesty ones tend to have been the New Englands rather than the West Coasters. So that's another thing we have to think about. But as I always say, hops will behave a bit differently depending on what yeast and what malt base you put them with. Simcoe is a prime example of that. You can use Simcoe really nicely in black IPAs, and it gives you red fruity notes compared to, you know, different passion fruits that it will give you in a more white malt base, could we say, a more regular malt base, whatever. But yeah, this is, as I say, very, very nice done. So just a wee bit of a kind of limey note behind the very kind of front edge of the tongue. So, on the, other than that, into the aftertaste, like I say, you get a wee bit of lime, you get a wee bit of gooseberry, and there's a bit of the kind of dried apricot note coming out of this beer. So I do like how all of that pieces together in this one. The fruity side of this beer, I think, is very, very nice. But yeah, it goes together well. It does go together really well. I don't think there's anything else we really need to say about the flavour of this one. It's solid. So let's round off this review with the mouthfeel. So for me, this is kind of bottom end of mid-bodied, pushing towards mid-bodied in fairness. Carbonation is very smooth. The beer does have a really nice kind of slickness to it actually, which I enjoy. In terms of IBUs, I think it's a kind of New England level bitterness that's in this one. This is definitely more of a kind of modern take on the West Coast Pale rather than anything else. But yeah, it's, I'd say, about 30 IBUs. Malt base has a bit of graininess to it, a nice little bit of smoothness for sure, and a bit of sweetness as well. The bready notes out of it are nice. I suspect local grains for sure. But yeah, green component for me is quite nice and smooth, more of a kind of wet green component to it rather than anything else. Then the fruits are nice and oily, and I would say it does, the further into the aftertaste you go, it leans towards the drier tropical fruits, but it does have a bit more of the kind of oily, lemon limey zesty kind of thing earlier on too, and a wee bit of gooseberry as well. So yeah, a really nicely done pale ale this one, and I would be curious to try a few of their other beers at some point in the future. So I do hope that Paul manages to get Lakada on board with Dalriada Imports and bring them over here to Scotland. That would certainly be very, very cool. But yeah, let's leave it at that for this one and see how we go. So this one was the West Bay, a Citra Pale Ale coming in at 4.6% ABV, a West Coast Pale Ale for sure, but this turned out to be very nice and I thought really drinkable. So I think I need to try a few more Lacada beers when I can get a hold of them at some point in the future. But yeah, thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Lacada Brewery Cooperative as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the future. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and big thank you to Paul Rogers of Dalriada Imports once again. Cheers.